Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Can I just check that people can hear me? Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks. Thank you very much. Well, and are my slides, will my slides be available in a moment? I can't see my slides at this point. Hi, everybody. So what I might do while we're waiting for my slides to become available, I'm hoping that they do. There we go. Lovely. All right. I just want to start off by welcoming everybody here today, but also just to introduce myself in the way that we often do in New Zealand. So I'll start. Ko tāraru te pai maunga, ko manawatu te awa, ko papaioia te kāinga, ko Kate McKegg te whānau, ko Kate McKegg taku ingoa. So my mountains are the Tararua Ranges. My river is the Manawatu River. My family home is Palmerston North in the Manawatu region of New Zealand. And my family are the McKegg family. And I am Kate McKegg. As you can see here, these are the places that my family is from. I want to point you to the map, show you where New Zealand is in the world. Often people think about us at the bottom of the world, but we like to think of ourselves at the top of the world if we flip the map the other way round. I'm descended from Irish, Scottish and English ancestors who arrived in New Zealand many years ago in the 1840s and 1860s, and with their family settling in a place called Otaki, and the Manawatu region of New Zealand on my father's side. And on my mother's side, I also descend from Irish and Scottish ancestors who arrived on ships also up to the west coast of New Zealand, moving to Napier and later to Auckland, which is the largest city in New Zealand. So I'm descended from weavers and writers and health professionals and social activists, and they all came to New Zealand as immigrants searching for a better life. So that's my ancestry, and I now live with my husband Richard and my son Patrick, and I have two other gorgeous children, William and Jessica, and I'm the very proud grandmother of Macklin. And so you can see my descendants and my family here. So that just gives you some idea of who I am. I've been working in evaluation for a very long time, several decades, in government and consultancy and in community contexts, in philanthropic contexts, and I've also taught evaluation in a number of places. But I'm coming to you today as a practitioner. So I'm a practicing evaluator, and I conduct evaluation in many, many places and contexts with a wide variety of communities. So here's what I'm going to cover today. I'm just going to do a few acknowledgements first, and then I'm going to get into what do we mean by mixed methods, and talk about mixing methods in the evaluation process, and then cover a little bit about why would you bother doing this. So first up, I want to start with some acknowledgements. When I was asked to speak today about mixed methods, I have to say I was initially quite surprised because I'm far from what I would call an expert evaluator, an expert in mixed methods. I'm an evaluation practitioner who uses many methods in my work, and so today I feel as if I'm standing on the shoulders of those with much more expertise than me. And there are two women in particular that I would like to acknowledge today, and one is the very lovely Donna Mertens, who we've just heard from, and Jennifer Green, who I would consider these two to be thought leaders in the area of mixed methods evaluation. However, today you've got me, so here goes. All right. So what do we mean by mixed methods in evaluation? Before I answer that question, I think it's really important for us to start by being clear about what evaluation is. and what its purpose is. Because once we're on the same page about what evaluation is, then I think that sets us up nicely to talk about methods. The definition I use here indicates that evaluation is underpinned by the systematic collection of information and evidence in order to say something about how well something was done, what its value is or was, and if it is worth doing more of it. It doesn't specify, this definition doesn't specify what kind of information or evidence might be needed, but just that our evaluation work must be underpinned by systematic information and evidence. So with that definition in mind, what might mixed methods in evaluation look like? Well, from my perspective, it's at its most simple or basic level, mixed methods is the combining or integrating of qualitative and quantitative methods in an evaluation process. The methods to me are the tools or the data gathering techniques we use to collect data, to collect our information and to gather our evidence. As an applied practitioner, although I have been aware of the very long-standing philosophical debates about how our methods can be thought of as different representations of the ways we understand the world, and that they come with all the various limits of knowing and approaches to knowing. In my practice, I am more often very pragmatically guided by the demands of the context in which I'm working, looking for practical and feasible ways to answer important evaluation questions. And in doing so, I've come to believe that it really is possible to reconcile these very different philosophical paradigms, not for a moment neglecting or forgetting about the really important issues that Donna raised in her presentation about power, about values, about context, and all of those really important parts of the context and the situations in which we find ourselves as evaluators. Almost all the evaluation questions and designs that I use in my work require a range of evidence and types of data if we are to adequately, validly, and credibly answer key evaluation questions. For example, in many of the contexts that I work in, if we're to ensure that the voices of diverse communities and cultures are to be respected and heard in our evaluations, it's highly likely that we will need to use a range of locally credible methods and contextually appropriate interpretive approaches if we are to validly and legitimately represent the complexity of the historical, social and cultural context that programs operate in. In my experience, methods and approaches that privilege a culturally different version of reality over a local or indigenous one can result in damage being done in ways that perpetuate historical injustice and do not transform the societies in which we're working. These kinds of methods and approaches, these kinds of privileged methods and approaches, are experienced by our communities as evaluation done to them or on them rather than with them. So it's important for me, the point that I want to make here is that our methods are not neutral, and they are all flawed in some way, but some are more flawed than others, depending on context, very, very much depending on context. Mixing methods, seeking out culturally appropriate methods and approaches, and having a range of sources of data balances out the limitations of our tools and ensures that diverse perspectives, values, insights, and interpretations are surfaced in an evaluation. In this next slide, I've laid out for you what I see as the 9 steps of good evaluation. And as you'll see, I've highlighted steps 5, 6, and 7. Because it's in these steps where we typically think about applying methods in evaluation. Some of the questions about methods we ask ourselves at these points are things like, what methods are credible and to whom are they credible? And viable to use in the context we're working? what do the combination of methods we have chosen mean for our evaluation design? Will we have to collect data sequentially, starting with a qualitative method, followed by a quantitative method, followed by some sort of integrative analysis? Or do we need to collect multiple sets of data in parallel at the same time? Is there one particular method that might inform the use of another? These are all really important questions that face us as we develop our evaluation designs and are the focus often of that 5th, 6th and 7th step. As this next slide illustrates, one of the ways I begin to answer some of these questions and structure evaluation design is to ensure that the methods and the sources of evidence that we choose are logically and appropriately aligned to the evaluation questions and the criteria we have developed to help us with evaluative reasoning and judgment making. For example, if I'm asking a question about how well a program was or is being implemented, I need to know what criteria will be used to judge what good delivery and implementation looks like. And then I'll need to be sure that the methods I use are credible and sufficient to make a robust judgment about the performance of that program. So this table is an example of the kind of evaluative practice that I use to ensure that we do gather a mix of credible and sufficient data to answer these evaluation questions. As you can see, another question we might ask is how valuable were outcomes for participants? Now, we have to also then decide what are our criteria of value. What does a valuable outcome look like to our participants in a program? And these are just example evaluation criteria that I present here. It could be that we decide that a valuable outcome is that there have been substantial and valuable gains in people's awareness and knowledge. It could be that there have been appropriate and sustainable changes in the actions and behaviours of participants in the program. Well, how do we know whether these things have actually occurred? In the third column, you'll see that I've included some examples of the sources of data and evidence that we might look to as part of answering those questions. This next slide provides an example of how, in practice, we work to make sure that each of our evaluative criteria uses a mix of methods to reach evaluative conclusions about performance. One of the proponents of evaluation-specific methodology, Dr. Jane Davidson, who is also a New Zealander, suggests that one of the most important rules of evaluation is to never draw a conclusion from a single piece of evidence. To be considered robust, our evaluative conclusions need to not only collect data from multiple sources, often using a mix of methods, as you can see here, but we must then draw those sources of data together to reach evaluative conclusions. And this bringing of sources together is a very important part of mixing our methods, and I'll say more about this in the next slide. So here, the point I want to make in this next slide is a different point to one of the ones I've made earlier, which is when I think about mixed methods in evaluation, traditionally, as I've pointed out, we generally focus on the collection of data we need to draw the evaluative conclusions about the goodness or performance of something, whether it's a program or an initiative or an organisation or a country for that matter. The point I want to make here is that as evaluators, we are actually mixing methods throughout the evaluation process, from the very start to the very end. When we scope an evaluation, for example, when we are agreeing the purpose with our clients, with our communities and other key stakeholders, we often mix qualitative and quantitative data collection and methods. We engage in interviews. We run workshops of various kinds with stakeholders to reach agreement about key evaluation questions, to determine what the important and relevant criteria are. We develop theories of change or logic models. We might do some outcome mapping. We're often involved in reviewing data, existing data, reviewing literature. All of these things are part of the beginning and the scoping part of evaluation, and they're not actually in that 5th, 6th and 7th. They're not necessarily the focus that we generally give to mixed methods. I think it's really important here also to stress that in mixing these methods, the purpose of doing this, the purpose of using multiple tools and methods to scope evaluation is very important for us to focus on, and that's to build trust, to build relationships with the people that we're working with, and the credibility of who we are and how it is we're going to operate, to build that credibility with key stakeholders. It's also for us to better understand the context, to make sure that we have a thorough understanding before we actually get into the evaluation design, so that we make sure that our methods and our approach will be the appropriate one to answer the key evaluation questions that we are being asked to answer. You'll see here also that all the way through an evaluation at step 6, 7, 8 and 9, we use a whole range of methods and approaches at each of these steps, again with key purposes for each of those steps. For example, in step 8, where we synthesize our evidence and draw that evidence together, in my practice and in many of my colleagues' practice, we use deliberative and participatory sense-making processes and activities with our communities and our stakeholders to draw the multiple methods, to draw those multiple sources of data together to make those evaluative judgments, to make sense of the data and make evaluative judgments that are credible to the people we're working with. And that way we are ensuring that there's much deeper understanding of both the evaluation process as well as the way in which those judgments have been reached. And we find this creates a much greater buy-in to the findings and the judgments that are made about how good something is, how valuable it is, and whether it is worthwhile. Similarly, in our reporting and our use of evaluation results, the more methods, the more approaches that we use in this part of evaluation, the more likely that our findings, that our conclusions will be understood and trusted and used by the key stakeholders to influence the change that we're hoping we will have. So I guess my point here is that as evaluators, it turns out that we have to develop really deep methodological toolkits across the evaluation process. We need to be very skilled and therefore very often, in order to be able to develop this kind of deep methodological toolkit, it's much better if we work in teams rather than as individuals, because no single individual can be an expert across this whole schema of methods and approaches throughout an evaluation. So having a team alongside you as you do this kind of tough work that we do is a wise choice. Sometimes I think it might have been better to have just trained as a statistician, then I could focus simply on step 7. But being an evaluator is much more fun, in my view. So why would we bother with mixed methods? I've used this quote from Jennifer Green because I think it captures what it is that I want to be able to say here. Many of us get into the field of evaluation to make a difference. I certainly did. We hope that by helping programs, initiatives, communities, organisations, even governments systematically look at how well they're performing and what impact they're having, that this might contribute to decisions that mean people act differently, more effectively, more kindly, more thoughtfully, to do things better, to improve people's lives, to improve our environment, and make the world a better place. It's my belief that using a mix of methods throughout our work, we are more likely to generate understandings that are broader, deeper, more inclusive, more credible to more people, and more able to take account of complexity. We're more likely to probe more deeply, unpack and challenge assumptions, give voice to perspectives that are often silenced or not considered mainstream. We're also far more likely to transparently and systematically reveal what is truly valuable and valued and what is not by our communities, and therefore engage in robust conversations about what needs to change, what should stay the same, and what we might need to do differently altogether. For me, this is the point of a mixed method approach to evaluation, is that it raises our understanding of what's going on. It increases our ability to be able to more transparently, more robustly answer key evaluation questions. A previous speaker talked about robust evidence as being an RCT design for impact. In my view, a mix of methods is vital if we are to have if we are to do robust evaluation. Because of all of these reasons, it's much more likely that we will reveal far more about the context in which we're working if we use a mix of methods. And I'm going to finish there and open the floor for questions. Hand it back to the moderator.